The President of the United States just made a joke. That's what the White House press service told us, that he made a joke. He said, well, now we're going to deal with Cuba. Now. That is, we put it off for a while because we were busy with something else, but now we have the time and the opportunity. From my point of view, there's only one explanation for this half-joke. As they say, every joke is only partly a joke. Yeah, exactly. Every joke is only partly a joke. So it really looks like Trump is going to step back from Iran. He has a plan. And this plan is smarter than his critics think. But as always, there are problems. It's impossible without problems. What are the problems? His and our enemies in Tehran, in Washington, and in Brussels understand this plan perfectly and are preparing a response. Today I'll tell you what options Trump has, what he's most likely to choose, and why the next 6 months could become the most dangerous, not in the Middle East, but inside America itself. Trump's options. Trump doesn't have a military task right now. He has a political task. In November, there are midterm elections for Congress. Up to 60% of Americans are against a war with Iran. Oil prices are high. Farmers can't afford to buy fertilizer. It's become too expensive. Consumer sentiment is at a historic low. In these circumstances, he has exactly 3 options. The first option is a complete withdrawal and, of course, triumphant rhetoric. Trump announces that the goals have been achieved. Iran's nuclear program is destroyed. Khamenei Sr. is dead. The regime is weakened. A unilateral memorandum is signed. The Strait of Hormuz is formally opened. The blockade is lifted. Trump steps in front of the cameras and says, "Hooray, we won." The details of the nuclear deal, but only after 37 days, 14 hours, and 8 minutes of negotiations. This option is politically attractive because oil prices drop. Americans breathe a sigh of relief. So Trump heads into the election with the slogan, "I stopped it." He brought back the war, but it has a vulnerability. The IRGC will see the withdrawal as weakness and will take advantage of it immediately. Option 2. Let's talk about how he will take advantage of it. Reducing the force, that is not a full withdrawal, down to just 1 aircraft carrier group. Not a withdrawal, but a shift to a sustained presence. 1 group stays, it's not fighting. No, of course not, it just exists. It simply exists in that part of the world, that's all. Any provocation gets a limited surgical response, something like, well, we're not fighting, we're just responding to provocations. For the American voter, this looks like control, not like war. This is a historically proven model. That's exactly how the U.S. operated in the Persian Gulf in 1987-88 during the so-called Tanker War. De facto, the conflict was political. It didn't exist. Well, that's it. It's just not there. They said it doesn't exist, so it doesn't. Now the third option. So, maintaining pressure, refusing a deal. Trump continues the blockade, puts pressure on the Iranian economy, just what Saudi Arabia and Israel would want, waiting for capitulation. This option is realistic only if the Iranian regime starts to collapse from within. But so far, there are no signs of that. The IRGC is keeping the situation under control, holding on to power, holding on. They decide what to do, so this option requires time, which, well, we don't have until November. We'll talk about it now, but until November, there isn't any. Trump will most likely choose a combination of the first and second options. He will sign a framework agreement, withdraw 2 groups, leave 1, and declare victory. This is not capitulation, this is political engineering. If you're watching this channel for the first time, subscribe and hit the bell. I analyze things like this regularly, and the next few months will be very eventful. And for those who want to go deeper, there's a private section for $4 a month. Well, it's uncensored there. Prediction. So what exactly will happen? Here is my very unscientific prediction. During May, maybe early June, Trump will sign a memorandum with Iran. This absolutely has to be done, exclusively for domestic political consumption by American voters. The U.S. formally ends the operation. Well, we've already announced, actually, that the war is over. The epic, so to speak, rage has ended. The blockade of Iranian ports is being lifted, but gradually. So here there are stories about which ships, which units are going home. The White House keeps projecting that impression. In the U.S., the impression is being created that we're leaving, slowly leaving. That's why the price of oil is falling and the stock market keeps going up. 2 out of 3 carrier strike groups are leaving the region. The official wording will be something like that. So, well, one is rotating and the other is being redeployed with different tasks. Trump will say, "We did our job. We are strong. We are here if needed." The precedents, by the way, speak for themselves. In 1988, after Operation Praying Mantis in the Persian Gulf, the U.S. struck Iranian oil platforms and ships, destroyed a significant part of the Iranian fleet, and left. Iran got the message. In 2003, after the capture of Iraq, Bush declared, "Mission accomplished." Well, he stood on the deck of the aircraft carrier. It was a bit grotesque and funny at the time, but still. So it was obvious to everyone that this wasn't the case, but politically, so to speak, he ended it and that was it. Like it worked. Trump understands this mechanism better than he's given credit for. One remaining group is not a weakness. It's a red line visible from a satellite. It's a signal. We left, but we didn't really leave. And now pay attention. What I'm about to say is something most analysts either don't see or are afraid to say out loud. Because it means that Trump's enemies, some of them are not in Tehran, but much closer. Watch until the end. You'll be surprised at how coordinated this game can be. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not just an army, it's a state within a state. They have their own enterprises, their own financial flows, their own intelligence service. Any peace agreement with America threatens their power within Iran. If Pezeshkian makes a deal with Trump, the IRGC loses its main argument for existence, the image of an external enemy. That's why the IRGC is deeply interested in making sure the war continues, or even better, that it resumes after a short pause. They have the tools at hand: a Houthi attack on an American ship, a mine in the Strait of Hormuz, a missile strike on a base in Bahrain. All of this can technically be presented as, well, it's not Iran, it's not us. But Trump will be forced to respond. And the American and European media will immediately say, hooray. The war is back. They just won't say hooray, hooray, hooray. No one is sitting in the same room with Iranian generals, but the interests are perfectly aligned. Any IRGC provocation becomes a CNN headline. Trump dragged us into war yet again. And any retaliatory strike is escalation, and any silence is weakness. Another strike, escalation, silence again is weakness. Trump, they say, loses either way if he doesn't control the narrative. Several key Democratic senators have already prepared resolutions to limit the president's war powers. They're waiting for the first incident to put them on the agenda. This isn't conspiracy theory, gentlemen, it's standard opposition mechanics. Macron, Schultz, Starbird are interested in a weak Trump because a strong Trump puts pressure on them regarding NATO, Ukraine, and trade. A provocation by the IRGC will give them a reason to speak out. The American leadership is unpredictable, and there is hope that Congress will be taken over by their friends, the Democrats, who won't let Trump carry out his plans and projects to the end. They won't coordinate with Tehran, but they'll use every Iranian move to advance their own agenda. And this objectively weakens Trump ahead of November. That is, they will do everything possible to make things worse for Trump and consequently for America. The game there is multi-layered, and Trump knows this. But Trump has already proven several times that he knows how to get out of traps that his opponents thought were already closed. Iran is economically exhausted. The IRGC is strong internally, but it cannot feed the Iranian people. It cannot keep the Strait of Hormuz closed indefinitely without catastrophic consequences for Iran itself. In the long run, the war is not on Tehran's side. Their move, their ability to pressure America is limited until November before the elections. Trump's options return to him immediately after the elections, and for at least 6 months he can act. Well, I don't know. If Congress becomes Republican, that's all it takes to break Iran. So, Iran, the Democrats, and the European Union have until November to do everything possible to ruin Trump's plans. And what is Trump's plan? Let's remember, to make America great again. That's the plan they want to ruin. If Trump manages the next 6 months correctly, for example, keeps one group, signs a framework document, keeps oil prices stable, and gives Americans a sense of stability, that means the choice.
Значит,
After November, he will have his hands free to deal with what is currently being postponed, the nuclear issue, the fate of the IRGC, and the long-term security architecture in the region. History has repeatedly shown the ability of the central administration to stop, the ability to sacrifice a queen to win the game. This is also a kind of strength and also speaks to the skill of the player. Subscribe, click the bell, and like if you agree, or write in the comments if you don't. The members-only section is $4 a month. Now let's talk about where the squadron will go. I left the Soviet Union in 1974. Today I want to tell you about a beautiful island 90 miles off the coast of Florida, where the same lie we've heard all our lives has been repeated many times in Spanish, and where people have been paying for it for 67 years. In 1958, Cuba was by no means a poor country. Read, as they say, anything about Cuba. Cuba had more cars per capita than most European countries, a higher literacy rate than Spain, and more televisions per family than Italy. The Cuban peso was exchanged 1-to-1 with the US dollar. Havana was the third largest city in the Caribbean basin, and it was wealthier than Miami. Yes, Batista was corrupt. Yes, there was injustice. Every honest person knew that. Well, the Shah in Iran wasn't a saint either. And so, when in January 1959, a young lawyer, not some poor, miserable lawyer, by the name of Fidel Castro came down from the Sierra Maestra Mountains, like we have the Sierra Madre, he was welcomed with flowers, not bullets. He promised free elections within 18 months. He promised a free press. He promised to put an end to corruption. He swore on television in front of the cameras that he was not a communist, and he lied, deceived, and tricked. By April 16, 1961, he was standing in Revolution Square and declaring his revolution to be Marxist-Leninist. By that time, the firing squads at La Cabaña Fortress had already been operating for 2 years under the command of the young Argentine doctor, again not a nobody, Guevara, Ernesto Guevara. Factories were confiscated, stores were confiscated, cattle were confiscated, newspapers were confiscated, schools were confiscated, churches were emptied. The same scenario that my relatives experienced in Russia, only translated into Spanish. Twice the free world tried to rewind this tape. April 1961, the Bay of Pigs. 2,500 Cuban exiles. Brigade 2506 landed on the southern shore of their homeland. President Kennedy, beloved by the Democrats, promised them air cover. And do you know what he did? At the last moment, he said, "Ah," and they were immediately abandoned on the beach. The first 100 people died, the rest surrendered and spent 2 years in Castro's prisons before they were released. Well, they were exchanged for baby food or cash. Everything ended right there. October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet nuclear missiles 90 miles from Florida. The world held its breath. Khrushchev blinked. Let's put it this way. Yes, the missiles were withdrawn. But there was also a secret part of the agreement that we weren't told about, and it's still unclear who blinked, whether it was Kennedy or Khrushchev. There was a secret part of the agreement. The U.S. pledged never to invade Cuba. That was the commitment. It's like a lock on a cage, which means the Cuban people have been living inside this cage for 64 years now. Well, we know who lives inside a cage, right? We know this is the libreta, the food ration card, introduced in 1962, still in use today, and will still be in 2026. 5 eggs a month, half a pound of chicken, a bar of soap, half a pound of chicken, not half a chicken, 1 bar of soap. The government will keep track of that soap. These are the committees for the defense of the revolution, kind of like the Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. One informant on every block who visits whom, what they listen to on the radio, whose lights stay on too long. These are the camps from the late 60s where they sent homosexuals, religious people. Where did they send them? Chopping sugarcane in the sun won't reform them, but for some reason everyone died. Even before that, almost reformed, but died. A doctor who earned $30 a month in a country where a waiter in a tourist hotel makes $300. Sheets that you bring with you to the hospital because the hospital doesn't have any. No, there are no sheets in the hospital. It's 20-hour power outages in 2025 in a country that the UN once praised for free electricity. Cubans are fleeing their paradise on car inner tubes tied together with ropes. They're called balseros, rafters. Estimates of the number of people who died in the Florida Straits range from 16,000 to 100,000. Mothers, children, doctors, poets. In 1980, over the course of 5 months, 125,000 Cubans packed into anything that could float and set out toward Miami. This was called the Mariel Exodus. In 1994, there was a second wave, and today, in 2026, against a backdrop of blackouts and hunger, a third one is rising. My own people, Soviet Jews, knew this arithmetic in their bones, and so did the East Germans at the Berlin Wall. Ladies and gentlemen, no one risks their children's lives to escape from paradise. They take that risk to escape from a prison. And who was paying for the Cuban prison? The Soviet Union was sending Cuba from $4 to $6 billion a year for 30 years. They bought sugar at fantastic prices and sold oil at giveaway prices. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, Cuba entered what Castro himself called the special period. Well, the average Cuban lost between 5 and 12 kilograms of weight during the special period. They ate cats, they ate banana peels, the regime survived, but the people lost. Then. So Hugo Chavez became their patron, and in 1926, Vladimir Putin became their patron again. In 1922, Russia wrote off Cuba's debt of $32 billion. Well, it was impossible to get it anyway, so. Let's just write it off, there's nothing to take there. In 1924, Russian warships entered the harbor in Cuba for the first time since the Cold War. Into the harbor of Havana. They entered the harbor of Havana. The chain hasn't been broken, it's just been painted a different color. Why am I, a Russian-speaking immigrant living in Los Angeles, telling you about Cuba in May 1926? Because in New York, a young man named Zoran Mamdani is preparing to do what Fidel Castro did in Cuba. City grocery stores in the Russian year entered Havana. Please, Havana, decorated for what purpose in Los Angeles? For destruction. By order of the mayor, free buses are being restored, well, which are paid for by the rich, because someone has to pay for the fuel, for the buses, for salaries. A check that will bring public housing to a scale that my Soviet hometown would recognize at first glance. He, Zokran, calls himself a democratic socialist just like Hugo Chavez did. Chavez, do you remember that person? Salvador Allende was also a democratic socialist. Fidel Castro was too until April 16, 1961. Then a grocer in Queens opened up, watching as City Hall announced a government-run grocery store across the street. This is a shopkeeper in Havana, Cuba, in 1960. The same logic, the same polite language, the same trajectory. See it through to the end. Cuba in 1958 was richer than Spain. A free Cuba, just 90 miles from the most dynamic economy in human history, will amaze the world for decades to come. Miami and Havana will become cities of bustling trade and family reunions within a year. 2.5 million Cuban Americans, one of the most enterprising communities this country has ever welcomed, will flood back with capital, knowledge, with music, with love. Ladies and gentlemen, Cuba is not a foreign story to me. I have never been there in my life, but it is not a foreign story. It is my story told in another language. I'm not at all sure that I like the idea of conquering Cuba, but I really like the idea of negotiating with the Cuban leadership about opening the country for free choice by its people. The government they want is elected. They can travel wherever they want, produce what they want, do with it what they want. All of this together is called freedom, and perhaps for that the descendant of the Cuban revolutionaries could be promised immunity. And now let's bring these two stories together into one. I started this video with a joke from the president. He said, "Now let's deal with Cuba." The press service explained to us that it was a joke. I said then, and I'll repeat now, it's a joke with a grain of truth, and now I can name that grain. In June and July, 2 out of 3 American aircraft carrier groups will leave the Persian Gulf. One will go for rotation, and the second, according to the official wording, will be relocated due to other tasks. Then arithmetic questions arise. Where in the world does one carrier group instantly change the balance without bloodshed, without a single shot, without a single landing miles south of Florida? What Trump, in my opinion, will build with Iran is a framework document, a partial withdrawal, one remaining group like a red line visible from a satellite. The same architecture will work with Cuba in exactly the same way. Here is its formula. Well, in one, so to speak, line, in one sentence, to squeeze the regime financially. Don't hit the people in the gut, and at the peak of the pressure, offer the leadership a way out. What does a way out mean? I've already said, I'm not sure I like the idea of conquering Cuba, and I'm not sure I like the idea of conquering Iran. But I really like this other idea. Imagine a unilateral document lying on the table at the same time in Havana and in Tehran. It has 4 lines. The first one, you open up the country, free elections, free press, the right to choose. Second line, the external blockade is lifted within 30 days after the first free vote. Third, American capital and the global market open up for you on the same day. And fourth, most importantly, your children, your grandchildren, the descendants of those who made your revolution, are guaranteed immunity. No tribunals, no lists, no persecutions. You leave the stage. These are not harbors, not in Pakistan, not in Iran. This is the very deal that turns a blockade from an act of war into a negotiating tool. This is not the Bay of Pigs. In 1961, it's not the gunboats of '98. It's a chess game where sacrificing the queen in Hormuz turns into checkmate in the Caribbean without a single dead soldier on either side. 100 million. 90 million Iranians, 11 million Cubans, 100 million people. Today, they are among the most miserable people in the world. They sit on the 3rd largest oil reserves in the world and the 2nd largest gas reserves, on the best tobacco in the world, on the best sugar in the world, with 9 months of sunshine a year. And yet an Iranian mother makes soup from bones, and a Cuban grandmother brings her own sheets to the hospital. And in 10 years, after the regime is gone, these will be the happiest and richest people in the world. A free Iran, the new Japan of the Middle East, a free Cuba, the new Pearl of the Caribbean, where every house will be worth $1 million, because people from all over the world will want to buy, they will want to go there. But this isn't just my fantasy, this is what happens in the world. Andrew Galambos, the man whose science of will I teach, put it more simply than I do. Wealth is not oil, not land, not climate. Wealth is the right to choose for yourself. A person becomes rich the moment he decides for himself what to plant today, what to buy, what to say, whom to trust, whom to love, where to move. Iranians have been denied this right for 40 years, 47 years already, and Cubans for 67 years. And this is why it concerns New York. If the Cuban regime is publicly exposed to the American voter, if the Iranian regime is publicly exposed to the American voter, it loses its last foothold. Because you can't sell the Cuban recipe to a New Yorker the same week the Cubans themselves are throwing that recipe in the trash. A free Cuba is the best vaccine for Queens. A free Iran is the best vaccine for Dearborn. The Democratic Party's elixir in Brussels lasts until the midterm elections in November to ruin our lives. This is the window, and they know it well, even if it's in November. And if Congress stays with the Republicans, Trump will have a free hand. Well, for a year, or at least for half a year, then the elections start again, and after more than a year, it starts to get risky there. For what? To finish building what we just described. That's why the next 6 months are the most important, not in the Middle East, but inside America itself. I will talk about this every week. At the very least. I left the Soviet Union in 1974 smiling the kind of smile that only people who have understood something for the first time in their lives can smile. From that moment on, I would be the one making the choices. You know, there's a wonderful Soviet joke about when Rabinovich goes on a round-the-world trip from the Soviet Union. I don't know who let him out or how, but he leaves and writes, "So, greetings to friends and relatives from free Czechoslovakia. 3 days go by, then 3 days later. Greetings to friends and relatives from free Hungary, Rabinovich. Greetings to friends and relatives from free Chile, Rabinovich." Then there's silence for 2 weeks, and then a new telegram. Greetings to friends and relatives from America, free Rabinovich. In 5 years, maybe in 7, an Iranian girl in Tehran and a Cuban boy in Havana will smile exactly the same smile. And on that day, I honestly say I will smile with them because I know that smile. Subscribe, hit the bell if you haven't done it yet. Just subscribe and hit it. See you.